When Sarah first brought a new man into the house, her daughter Emily looked at him warily. In her 17 years, the world was divided into black and white, into his and strangers, and the fact that someone outsiders appeared in her familiar apartment seemed almost an invasion. His name was David. Tall, slightly stooped, with attentive eyes. There was something soft in them, although in his gait and speech the firmness of a person who was used to taking responsibility was felt. Emily watched him silently, trying not to give out emotions. She was still missing her father, although he left their life for a long time. "Emily, this is David," Sarah said, smiling as she had not smiled for a long time. "We decided to live together." The word decided hung in the air. Emily nodded without saying a word. She did not want to argue, and there was no strength. She felt that a new life would gradually begin in this house, in which there would be no room for her memories and habits. The first weeks passed wary. David did not try to impose. He seemed to feel the borders and gently went around them. Sometimes he left Emily in the kitchen neatly chopped fruits or put a mug of hot tea, if she saw that she was sitting behind the textbooks for a long time. He did not pronounce either loud instructions or sharp remarks. "He is trying," the mother said once when they were left alone. "Maybe," Emily answered indifferently, but in her soul a strange feeling originated, as if this person is trying not only to become a part of the house, but to earn her trust. Sometimes Emily caught herself on listening to his steps in the corridor. She captured the intonations of his voice when he talked with his mother. The voice was calm, even as if always ready to support. One evening when Sarah lingered at work, Emily went out into the kitchen and saw David for cooking. He cut vegetables, concentrated and measuredly. Something fragrant on the stove was shy. "Are you cooking?" She was surprised. "Yeah." He smiled out of the corner of his lips. "I decided that my mother would get tired, but dinner is still needed." Emily silently sat down at the table. She suddenly became strangely comfortable in this silence, breaking only with the knock of a knife on a cutting board. In the house for the first time in a long time, the presence of a man was felt, not sharp and imperious but calm, confident. When he gave her a plate of soup, she noticed that his hands were large, strong, but the movements were soft, as if he was afraid to frighten her away. "Thank you," she said quietly, for the first time sparring with him without a knuckles. "Always please," he answered simply. That evening she could not fall asleep for a long time, as if something new originated in the air between them, light, intangible. In the following days, Emily began to notice details that she had not paid attention to before. How he carefully hangs her jacket if she threw her in the chair. How to correct the books on the shelf if they lie carelessly. How sometimes he holds her eyes on her, but he immediately turns away, as if he does not want it to be noticeable. She became curious. At school, friends discussed the guys, the first relations, but Emily seemed that it was all too superficial, uninteresting. But David, he was different. It felt some kind of inner power, and at the same time the ability to store pauses. One evening they again remained together. Sarah was delayed more and more often, and their joint dinners became a kind of silent ritual. This time David put a cup of tea on the table. "Do you with or without honey?" he asked. "With honey," she answered. "I thought so," he said, as if he had known her for a long time. For some reason, these simple words warmed her. Emily watched him sitting opposite, and felt a strange excitement. Unusual tickling. At that moment, snow went outside the window. White flakes fell on the glass, and the room became even more comfortable. David looked at her, then at the window and said, "It seems that soon everything will be brought. It's good that we are at home." And Emily first thought that this word, "we," sounds not so alien. Every day, Emily was increasingly difficult to pretend to be indifferent. David became part of her everyday life. His presence was felt in the little things. The smell of freshly brewed coffee in the morning, neatly washed plates, the quiet creaking of his steps behind the door of her room. Sarah seemed to have not noticed changes. She often lingered at work. The tired returned home and with relief left home worries on the shoulders of David. Emily noticed. Every time his mother smiled at him, something warm appeared in his eyes. But at the same time, when his gaze accidentally met with her own, for some reason he turned away a little too fast. One evening, Emily sat in the living room with a book. It was raining outside the street, echoing a drum on the windowsills. Sarah was delayed again, and Emily was already used to, which now more often remains with David alone. He entered the room with a blanket in his hands. "You will freeze," he said calmly, covering her shoulders. Emily shuddered in surprise but said nothing. The plaid is its cologne, barely perceptible, mixed with the smell of coffee and something wood. She wanted to say something but the words stuck. David sat in a chair opposite, took a newspaper. For some time, only a rustle of pages and a sound of rain were heard in the room. Emily furtively looked at him over the book. There was nothing sharp in his face, but something was present. Sustainable, as if a person finally appeared in this house, capable of keeping everything in balance. "Do you like to read?" he suddenly asked, not raising his eyes from the newspaper. "Yes," Emily answered quietly. "Me too. True, it has not been possible for a long time." He grinned. Life somehow twisted. She thought that it was probably not easy for him to decide on a new family. And for the first time I felt not alertness to him, but a light pity mixed with interest. A few days later, Sarah went on a business trip. For a short while, only 3 days, but it was a test for Emily. The house now remained only 2 of them. The first evening passed calmly. David prepared the paste, they had dinner together, almost not talking. But the silence was no longer awkward, rather calm. On the second day, Emily lingered at school due to preparation for the concert. When she returned, it smelled of pastries in the house. There was a pie in the kitchen on the table. David sat at a table with a cup of coffee and raised his eyes. "You are probably hungry. Are you baking?" She was surprised. "Well tried." He smiled. "Sarah once said that you love an apple pie." Emily felt warm to the cheeks. He noticed her habits, her tastes, and did something for her. She took a piece of pie, and he really turned out to be tasty, albeit a little crooked. "Very good," she said. "You're lying," David grinned. "But thanks." They both laughed, and the laughter sounded so natural that Emily felt easily in a long time. In the evening of the same day, they ended up in the living room. Emily turned on the TV, but her attention was slipped to David all the time. He sat next to him, leaning forward a little, and the light from the screen illuminated his face. She noticed how his hand accidentally touched the armrest of the sofa very close to her hand. Emily lurked her breath. No movement, only a light hint of proximity, is almost invisible. But from this her head was dizzy. "Emily," he said suddenly quietly, "I don't want you to be uncomfortable with me." She turned around, meeting with his gaze. There was something contradictory in him, care, restraint, and like caution. "I'm not uncomfortable," she answered even quieter. David looked away, but a barely noticeable shadow of a smile flashed in the corners of his lips. And that evening Emily realized, something is changing in their relationship. The third day of the Sarah business trip was the longest for Emily. At school, she caught herself about what she was thinking about the house, about what was waiting for her. Returning, she found David on the veranda. He repaired something in garden furniture. His hands were in dust and small scratches. "Do you always do everything yourself?" she asked, crouching on the steps. "Habit," he answered. "When there is no one nearby who can help, you get used to relying only on yourself." Emily nodded. She looked at him and thought that for the first time she realized, this person is also alone in his own way, and perhaps that is why he is so carefully entering her life. The sun settled, staining the sky with gold. At this moment, Emily caught himself thinking that for the first time tomorrow was waiting, not for the sake of school or friends, but in order to see him next to him again. The return of the Sarah from the business trip turned out to be everyday, but in the soul of Emily everything looked different. She watched the mother hugs David, thanks him for care, as they laughed together at some trifles. It would seem that everything is natural, but Emily felt a slight tension inside. She first noticed that she was jealous. Jealousy was not a mother. Emily was calm to her happiness. Jealousy was to the attention that Sarah received from David. In those 3 days, he belonged only to her world, small and quiet, and now everything was again divided into two. A week passed. In the house, everything returned to its circles, but Emily felt a change. She began to look for his gaze more often, capture the details. I noticed how he frowned a little, reading the news in the evenings, how habitually adjusted the glasses that he put on reading. David has changed too. He almost did not allow himself to look directly at her, but his presence nearby was felt stronger than before. Sometimes, passing by, he spoke the short "be careful" or "do not linger," and Emily felt more care in these simple words than in any long phrases. Once at the school, Emily was asked to stay after classes, rehearse for a concert. There was a snowfall on the street, and the buses were delayed. When she finally left the building, it was already dark. The phone is discharged, and there was almost no hopes for a taxi. At the gates of the school stood a car. The headlights illuminated snow. Emily recognized her right away. It was David. "Sit down," he said, opening the door. She looked at him in surprise. How did you find out that I'm here?" "Sarah said you have a rehearsal. I thought that in such weather it is better to take you." Emily got into the car. Inside was warm, and the smell of his cologne seemed even stronger to her. She noticed that his hands were tense on his steering wheel. "Are you worried?" she asked. "A little," he answered shortly. "It is important that you be safe." These words warmed her stronger than the heater. The road home went in silence. Only the snow went softly on the windshield, and the janitors glided measuredly back and forth. Emily sat stealthily watching his profile. In the light of headlights, his face seemed strict, but in the corners of his lips the softness that she saw only she lied. "Thank you," she said when they drove up to the house. "Always please," he answered habitually, but this time something special sounded in his voice. In the evening, Emily could not fall asleep for a long time. She tossed turning, sorting through her thoughts until she dared to go out into the kitchen for a glass of water. The light above the stove has already burned. David was sitting at the table with a book in his hands. "You can't sleep either?" He was surprised. "No." Emily sat down opposite. "And you?" "Habit. He used to work at night before." She nodded and silently watched him. At that moment silence hung between them, but not awkward but thick, almost tangible. Emily felt. It is worth saying one extra word, and everything will change. "Emily," he suddenly said and immediately fell silent as if tearing himself. She raised her eyes and met his gaze. There was too much in it. Caution, desire, doubt. She wanted to ask what, but the tongue did not turn. They sat for several minutes, not saying a word anymore. And yet this silence was the most significant conversation in her life for Emily. The next day, Sarah suggested going to the three of them to the shopping center for gifts for Christmas. Emily noticed. David behaved especially restrained. He did not look in her direction once again. He spoke only on business. But when they accidentally found themselves near the store, his hand barely noticeably touched her fingers, fleeting, as if by chance. Emily felt the heartbeat more often. And then she realized, everything that happens between them cannot be called directly. It was in hints, in pauses, in small gestures. But this is what attracted her most strongly. Winter gained strength. The city drowned in the snow, the streets seemed quieter than usual, and evenings in the house were filled with the soft light of lamps and the smell of hot cocoa. Sarah spent more and more time at work, preparing for reports, and almost did not notice how often Emily and David remained together. Emily began to catch himself on what awaits these evenings. Each time as a little secret known only to them. Sometimes it was simple things. A joint dinner, a film on an old TV, or a conversation about books. But it was in these trifles that the feeling of intimacy arose, which could not be called aloud. One evening, Emily returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. She went into the kitchen and saw David. He stood by the window, looking thoughtfully at the street. He had a glass of wine in his hands, but he did not drink, just held it. "Everything is fine?" Emily asked carefully. He turned around as if not immediately noticing her. Fatigue flickered on his face, the one that he usually skillfully hid. "Yes," he answered briefly. "Just the day was heavy." She wanted to leave, but something kept her. Emily came closer and stood nearby, also looked out the window. The snow slowly fell behind the glass, and their reflections in the dark glass stood nearby as if they were one. "You know," David said after a pause, "sometimes it seems to me that I was here by chance. As if this house could be without me and still would be in order." Emily shook her head. "No, this is wrong." He looked at her, as if trying to understand the seriousness of her words. At that moment, Emily felt that he was telling the truth. His presence changed everything, and without him the house would no longer be the same. On Christmas Eve, Sarah went to her sister to help with preparation, promising to return late at night. Emily and David were left together. The house smelled of cinnamon and coniferous candles. They dressed up the Christmas tree, laughed at the fact that the garlands were constantly confused. Emily handed him a star for the top. "It's your turn," she said. David stood on a stool, gently hoisted the star, and jumping, shook his hands. The Christmas tree lit up with soft golden light. They both fell silent, considering the result. "Beautiful," said Emily. "Yes," he agreed quietly. But at that moment he looked not at the Christmas tree, but at her. She noticed this look and felt the heart go somewhere in the heels. She wanted to say something, but the throat was dry. In the evening, they sat on the couch with hot chocolate circles. The TV showed the old festive film, but none of them watched. Emily felt how the space between them was reduced every minute, even if they physically sat at a distance. "Do you love Christmas?" she asked to diffuse the silence. "Before, not very." He grinned. "But maybe everything changes." Emily smiled. At that moment, her fingers involuntarily slipped along the edge of the plaid lying between them. She noticed how he slightly shifted his hand, and their fingers almost touched. Almost, but not quite. It was this almost that made her heart beat faster than any obvious gesture. Closer to midnight, Emily rose to her. But the dream did not go. She walked around the room, listening to the silence of the house. Somewhere below the staircase creak. David passed by. Emily went to the door, put her hand on the handle, but did not open. She just stood, feeling his steps behind the wall. It suddenly became clear to her. What was born between them cannot be stopped. It grows in every gaze, in every word, in every random touch. When Sarah returned home, the house was already asleep. She entered the living room, saw a dressed Christmas tree, neatly left mugs on the table, and smiled. What a good fellows! She did not know that in the silence of the second floor, Emily lay without sleep, listening to the breath of the house and thinking only about one person. Christmas passed quietly. Gifts, a family dinner, a few photos of the Christmas tree, everything looked as it should have been. Sarah was happy. She laughed, hugged both of them, and relief shone in her eyes. Everything turned out perfectly for her. But Emily knew. Inside, everything is different. Between her and David there were invisible threads that could not be cut off and could not be called. After the holidays, weekdays began. The school, preparations for exams, Sarah again went to work until late. Emily tried to focus on studying, but thoughts returned to the evenings with David, to their silent conversations, to his gaze, to the almost that hung between them, but did not become clear. She understood. This is a path that has no continuation. Everything should remain just like that. Hints, pauses, silence. Any extra word would destroy their world. One evening, Emily lingered in the library. When she returned, it was dark in the house, only light from the kitchen. David was sitting there, bending over the papers. "You are not sleeping?" she asked. "I'm waiting," he answered simply. These two words stuck in her heart. She came closer, put the textbooks on the table, and met with his gaze. They were silent for a long time. "Emily," he said quietly, "you are still very young. You have a whole life ahead. I should not be part of it more than necessary." These words sounded firmly, but in his eyes something was read that he did not say. Emily wanted to object but could not. She only nodded, feeling how she squeezes in her chest. Since then, much has changed. David has become even more careful. Fewer views, fewer random gestures. But this did not mean that something disappeared. It remained like a quiet light in memory, as a book that was not read to the end, but they know each page by heart. Emily realized. Sometimes the most important remains unspoken. Spring brought new changes. Emily graduated from school, prepared to go to college. Sarah and David supported her, helped collect documents. Life entered the usual direction, and for everyone around them they were just a family. But in rare moments when their views accidentally intersected, Emily knew. There is something between them that no one will ever know. Not a novel, not an open story, but a quiet, fragile connection that will remain with her forever. And that was enough.